A couple of things that you can do when you want to print an image from Photoshop in order to draw. I could print my image in color. If I don't want to do that though, if I want a black and white image or if I want just the outline so that I can see all the different shapes that I'm trying to draw, what I would probably do is I'd suggest going over, if I've got my layers panel open, I want to right click on that background layer and I want to make a duplicate layer of the background. And part of the reason that I do that is that way we've got lots of different options to print from in just a few minutes. So I'm going to click on the lock, make sure that my first layer is locked. I've got my one background copy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go under image and I'm going to go on the adjustments, and I'm actually going to make my image a little bit brighter before I turn it into a black and white image. So here you can see I'm toggling the brightness. I could also make it have more contrast. I don't really want to do that, so I'm going to make sure that my contrast stays at 0. So here you can see when I turn the image on and off of my background copy, I've got a brighter image and a darker image. Then what I want to do is I'm going to actually make this black and white. So I'm going to go under image again and under adjustments, and I am going to choose black and white for this. And it's actually going to remove the color here for me. I could toggle the reds and blacks and whites different colors, but for right now I'm just going to let the computer choose it. It actually did a pretty good job because I can actually see most of my image. So I'm going to say OK, and then I'm actually going to turn the little eyeball off so that we can see the original photo. And I want to show you one other thing. So I'm going to duplicate that original photo layer again. And what you'll notice is I also have my adjustments panel open. And just as a reminder, in order to get to those different panels, under my drop-down window bar across the top, I've got different things that I can select. So I've got my adjustments, the history, layers, and then I've got my tools open. If I toggle around these adjustment or quick select adjustments that I have here, you can see it says different things. So I can actually just very quickly make a black and white layer. One thing that you do need to be aware of, so it did automatically made it black and white for me rather than going into those drop down menus, but what I'm noticing here is it's awfully dark in some of these areas, and our printer tends to print a little bit dark. So in order to get something that's going to work for what you're trying to draw, you may not want to use the adjustment tabs. If you're used to them, if you take photography beforehand, you can of course do that, and you'll notice here I'm toggling the red, and it's actually making different areas of the drawing brighter. And what I actually want to do is I'm going to go back down here just so that I can show you the difference. I'm going to actually take this and I'm going to drag it to the trash, and I'm going to do that one more time. So on my layer here, I'm going to just automatically select the black and white, and then I'm going to close what the options were open there. If I actually double click on this circle that's in there, I can get back to the actual differences in the black and white settings in that adjustment panel. And I just want to show you the difference between, like, here is the brightness and contrast image that I also made black and white. And the reason I did that in one layer again is I can see it's bright enough that it's probably going to print just fine for what I'm trying to draw, as opposed to this image where I really quickly did the adjustment. It's a little bit too dark. Like, it's a really great photo if my printer actually didn't print too dark, but we're probably going to want to use the drop down menus rather than using those quick adjustment selections in there. So I'm going to turn that one off. I'm going to turn my background copy back on. And another thing, I'm going to make a couple other background copies here, and part of the reason for that is I'm going to turn off that black and white copy. I'm going to unlock my layer, and part of the reason I unlocked the layer is I'm going to go into the filters now, and I might need to adjust my brightness and contrast before I do that. But one thing I wanted to mention before we go there is here I can see there's a filter gallery. I haven't actually selected anything right yet, But one thing I want you to notice is there's a last filter selected here. What that last filter does is after I've selected something, it's going to say filter gallery here too, but it actually does exactly what the last filter was that you chose. So you have to be careful between the filter gallery and the last filter because it does get a little bit confusing as it continues to go forward. So like I mentioned before, I am going to make this image just a little bit brighter. And actually I'm going to show you the difference here in just a minute. So I'm going to take the filter gallery, I'm going to go into the cutout layers, and here I can see it's really zoomed in. So if I click on this bottom right hand part, or excuse me, the bottom left hand part of my window, and I zoom out, I'm actually even going to zoom out to 12% just so that I can see all of my images. So here I've actually got the number of levels all the way up to 8. Photoshop knows that I happen to like lots of layers like that, so it automatically gave me a selection of 8. What you hopefully can see, and I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see this a little bit better, is that it's actually breaking these into really hard-edged layers. So you're still seeing lots of different color values, but it's breaking it into hard edges so that it's a little bit easier to draw the shapes that are within an image. I am not real thrilled with this, like I had mentioned before, so I'm going to cancel out of there, and I'm actually going to make this image a little bit brighter. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to make it bright like that. Then I'm going to go under the filter, select filter gallery, and I'm in the cutout layers again, and I can see already here there's a lot more layers for me to choose from than what there were in there before. So you can see there's lots of different value shapes that the program is seeing. So if I say OK, what it's going to do is if I toggle this on and off, it's here you can see the original photo with very smooth transitions in value, and when I click on the filter that I've got, it's got a cutout filter and it's got lots of different shapes here that I can see. I could do this same thing on the black and white image, and like I mentioned before, this was the last filter that I selected. It's going to do exactly the same thing on that layer, and so what it did is it broke these shapes that were very subtle before into more recognizable shapes for me to draw. This becomes a little bit more apparent when I'm drawing human figures, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But just so that you can see, there's different things that you can do with filters. I'm going to turn these 2 layers off. I'm going to make another copy of the background layer just so that you can see differences in the different layers. Again, I have to turn the lock off in order for me to do anything. So I'm going to go under the filter. This time, instead of selecting artistic, I'm actually going to, I'm going to, under sketch, select photocopy. And part of the reason that it just turned pink like this is I actually had like a purpley pink selected down in my brush tools because it's actually going to fill with whatever color you have. So I have to go down in here, select black, and then I can go back into my photocopy filter. And I have to shut the cutout filter again. Go into sketch, I'm going to select black and white, and here you can actually see that I've got it more black and white now. I can actually make more detail, less detail, or I can have less darkness. Again, I'm zoomed way far in, so I actually want to see, this is showing me where the lines are that I would have to draw for my image. So I might want to make it less dark and maybe have more detail, and then you can actually see that there's lots of different lines and shapes that you would have to draw for this image. So if it helps you to make it into a black and white photocopy, you could do that. Another thing that you could do, so I've got my other layer here, I'm going to go into that filter gallery again, and this time I'm going to select graphic pen instead of photocopy. And part of the reason that I'm selecting that is if I zoom way out, that was a little bit too far for you to see. If you look at this, there's actually a line rendered value that's in this balloon. Line rendering, again, is that parallel lines that are used to create value. And you can actually select different directions of, so here I'm selecting left diagonal. Depending on what the picture looks like, the selections that you pick in here may make the piece look different. So for example, it actually looks better more on one of the diagonals than it did on vertical or horizontal, in my opinion. Partly that's because this diagonal is different from the diagonals that are the ropes in the balloon, and it actually made it look a little bit nicer. So I could say okay to that, and of course I can print this as my picture, but here's the problem with that. Like, the whole point of this assignment is learning how to either draw the image yourself or learning how to draw in Photoshop. So if you are actually drawing things, I'm expecting that you're not going to be using the filters if you are drawing in Photoshop, but you may use the filters in order to figure out how to draw different parts of the image if you are drawing them by hand. So again, I've got my different layers in here and different filters that I've used. I might want to print several different copies. Again, I can just go over to File, say Print, and go through the print queue that way. I do also want to save, so I'm going to save this as B. Schmidt Hot Air Balloon for drawing, or just drawing after. That way I know that this has my PSD that has all the layers of different versions of that hot air balloon if I need them for my drawing. And then I'm going to close out because now I'm done.